Everyone remembers the Ducatis, Hondas, and Kawasaki's that dominated 1990s, racing with the full weight of billion-dollar corporations behind them. But the most innovative motorcycle of that entire era didn't come from Italy or Japan. It came from a small workshop in New Zealand, built by a self-taught engineer who mortgaged his house to fund his dream. The Britten V1000 beat factory superbikes so consistently that the racing establishment did the unthinkable. They banned it. This is the shocking truth behind why they had to stop the motorcycle that was too advanced for its own good. John Britten grew up in Christchurch, New Zealand, about as far from the European and Japanese centers of motorcycle manufacturing as it's possible to get while still being on planet Earth. He wasn't a factory-trained engineer with degrees from prestigious universities or experience in corporate research and development departments. He was a self-taught innovator who understood engineering principles through experimentation, observation, and an almost instinctive grasp of how mechanical systems should work together. During the 1980s, while working on various engineering projects and custom motorcycle builds, Britten began to develop ideas about how racing motorcycles could be fundamentally reimagined if someone was willing to abandon the conventional wisdom that had governed motorcycle design since the early days of the industry. He looked at the heavy steel frames that every manufacturer used and asked why frames needed to exist at all if the engine could be designed as a stressed member that provided its own structural support. He examined the suspension systems that had remained largely unchanged for decades and questioned whether traditional telescopic forks were really the best solution or just the easiest one to manufacture. He studied aerodynamics and weight distribution and cooling systems, always asking whether the accepted way of doing things was actually the best way, or simply the way things had always been done, because no one had bothered to think differently. By the late 1980s, Britten had assembled a small team of like-minded enthusiasts in his Christchurch workshop and begun work on a racing motorcycle that would incorporate every innovative idea he had developed over years of thinking about how motorcycles could be better. The project started with the engine, a 998.7 cubic inch liquid-cooled 60-degree V-twin with quad camshafts and a 4-stroke design that prioritized power-to-weight ratio above everything else. Britten designed the engine to produce approximately 165 horsepower at 9,500 RPM, or revolutions per minute, with some later versions reportedly reaching 170 horsepower through continued development and refinement. These numbers might not sound extraordinary by modern standards, but in the early 1990s, they represented serious power from a relatively small displacement V-twin engine that weighed considerably less than the inline-4 engines that dominated superbike racing at the time. The engine featured innovative cooling solutions, including an underseat radiator ducting system that improved aerodynamics by eliminating the traditional radiator position at the front of the motorcycle, where it created drag and disrupted airflow. The truly revolutionary aspect of Britten's design became apparent when he began building the chassis, or rather, when he decided not to build a chassis in the traditional sense at all. Instead of designing a steel or aluminum frame to hold the engine, Britten engineered the engine itself to serve as a stressed member that provided the structural connection between the front and rear of the motorcycle. The swing arm, bodywork, and other components were constructed from carbon fiber and Kevlar composites, materials that were exotic and expensive in the early 1990s, but offered strength-to-weight ratios that traditional materials simply couldn't match. The entire motorcycle weighed approximately 303 pounds wet, making it extraordinarily light compared to factory superbikes that typically weighed 50 to 100 pounds more while producing similar or even less power. This combination of high power output and minimal weight gave the Britten V1000 a power-to-weight ratio that factory teams could only dream about achieving, and it translated directly into devastating performance on the racetrack. Britten's front suspension design represented another radical departure from conventional practice, abandoning the telescopic forks that had been standard on racing motorcycles for decades in favor of a double wishbone girder system that provided superior rigidity and adjustability compared to traditional forks that flexed and twisted under hard braking and aggressive cornering. The rear suspension used an adjustable swing arm connected to an Öhlins shock absorber, combining the best available damping technology with Britten's innovative chassis design to create a motorcycle that handled with precision and stability that amazed professional racers who tested it. The braking system featured dual 320mm front discs and a single 210mm rear disc providing stopping power that matched the motorcycle's impressive acceleration capabilities. The transmission used a 5-speed constant mesh design based on Suzuki components, demonstrating Britten's practical approach to incorporating proven systems where his own innovations weren't necessary, saving development time and resources for the areas where his radical ideas could make the biggest difference. The girder front suspension eliminated the brake dive and fork flex that plagued conventional telescopic systems, maintaining consistent geometry throughout the entire braking zone and allowing riders to carry more speed deeper into corners with complete confidence. The double wishbone design also provided vastly superior feedback compared to traditional forks, transmitting precise information about tire grip and road surface conditions directly to the rider without the filtering effect that telescopic forks created through their internal damping rods and oil. The adjustability of the girder system allowed Britten and his test riders to fine-tune the suspension geometry for different tracks and conditions, changing parameters that would have required completely different fork assemblies on conventional motorcycles. The lightweight carbon fiber construction of the swing arm reduced unsprung weight dramatically compared to aluminum or steel swing arms used by factory teams, improving suspension response and allowing the rear tire to maintain better contact with the track surface over bumps and ripples that would unsettle heavier systems. The Öhlins shock absorber was among the finest damping units available in the early 1990s, and Britten's integration of it into his innovative chassis design extracted performance that even Öhlins engineers hadn't anticipated when they designed the component for more conventional applications. The braking system's disc sizes were carefully calculated to provide maximum stopping power without adding unnecessary weight, with Britten understanding that every pound saved in the braking system could be invested elsewhere in the motorcycle, where it would provide greater performance benefits. The master cylinders and calipers were sourced from high-end suppliers who normally worked with factory race teams, demonstrating that Britten was willing to spend money on proven components when they met his performance requirements, rather than trying to reinvent every single aspect of the motorcycle, simply for the sake of being different. The chain drive system used lightweight sprockets and a high-quality chain that could handle the tremendous torque loads generated by the powerful V-twin engine without stretching or failing under the stress of hard acceleration out of corners. The footpegs, controls, and ergonomics were carefully positioned to allow riders to move their weight effectively and maintain optimal body position through corners, with Britten paying close attention to feedback from professional racers who tested the motorcycle and suggested refinements based on their experience. The attention to detail extended to seemingly minor components like fasteners and mounting hardware, with Britten using titanium bolts and lightweight materials wherever possible to shave grams and ounces from the overall weight without compromising structural integrity or reliability that could lead to failures during races. The first Britten V1000 made its racing debut in the early 1990s, competing in the Battle of the Twin Series and other events that allowed prototype and custom-built motorcycles to race against factory machines. The results were immediate and shocking to the racing establishment. The Britten consistently beat factory Ducatis and other established brands that had vastly larger budgets, professional race teams, factory support, and decades of racing experience behind them. Here was a motorcycle built in a small workshop in New Zealand by a self-taught engineer and a handful of enthusiasts, running on a shoestring budget that wouldn't have covered the catering costs for a factory race team. And it was embarrassing some of the most prestigious names in motorcycle racing. The Britten's lightweight construction allowed it to accelerate harder out of corners. Its innovative suspension provided superior grip and stability through technical sections, and its aerodynamic efficiency gave it impressive top speeds that reached 188 miles per hour, despite the relatively modest engine displacement. Professional riders who had the opportunity to race the Britten V1000 reported that it felt unlike anything they had experienced before, with handling characteristics that seemed almost telepathic in their responsiveness, and a power delivery that was both smooth and devastatingly effective. The carbon fiber and Kevlar construction created a motorcycle that felt alive underneath the rider, transmitting feedback from the tires and suspension in ways that helped riders push harder with more confidence than they could on conventional motorcycles that filtered and dampened that crucial information. The lightweight design meant that the Britten could be thrown into corners with minimal effort and redirected mid-corner with small inputs that would barely budge a heavier motorcycle, giving riders the ability to adjust their lines and compensate for mistakes in ways that simply weren't possible on factory superbikes that required more commitment and offered less forgiveness. As the Britten V1000 continued to rack up victories and podium finishes against factory competition, the racing establishment began to take notice in ways that went beyond simple admiration for an underdog success story. Race organizers and sanctioning bodies started examining the Britten's design in detail, looking for ways to classify it within existing rulebooks that had been written with traditional factory motorcycles in mind. The carbon fiber chassis that gave the Britten such a significant weight advantage became a particular point of contention, as many racing series had rules that required motorcycles to use steel or aluminum frames similar to production motorcycles that consumers could actually purchase. The frameless design, where the engine served as a stressed member, fell into a gray area that the rulebooks hadn't anticipated, because no major manufacturer had ever attempted such a radical departure from conventional practice. The innovative front suspension system raised similar questions, as it bore no resemblance to the telescopic forks that appeared on production motorcycles, and gave the Britten handling advantages that factory teams couldn't match without completely redesigning their own motorcycles from the ground up. The racing organizations faced a difficult decision. On one hand, the Britten V1000 represented exactly the kind of innovation and engineering excellence that motorsports were supposed to encourage and celebrate. John Britten had proven that creative thinking and engineering skill could overcome massive disadvantages in budget and resources, demonstrating that the established manufacturers didn't have a monopoly on good ideas or advanced technology. On the other hand, allowing the Britten to compete freely threatened to expose just how conservative and derivative the factory motorcycles had become, with manufacturers relying on incremental improvements to existing designs, rather than taking the kind of risks that Britten had embraced. If a self-taught engineer working in a small New Zealand workshop could build a motorcycle that consistently beat factory superbikes, what did that say about the billions of dollars that major manufacturers were spending on research and development? The marketing departments at major motorcycle companies had built entire campaigns around the premise that their racing success proved the superiority of their engineering and justified the premium prices they charged for their production motorcycles. The Britten V1000's victories undermined that carefully constructed narrative by demonstrating that engineering excellence didn't require massive corporate resources or decades of racing heritage, just creativity and the courage to abandon conventional approaches that weren't delivering optimal results. The factory teams had become comfortable operating within established parameters, making predictable changes that their corporate management could understand and approve without taking career-ending risks on radical innovations that might fail spectacularly. Britten had no corporate hierarchy to answer to and no quarterly earnings reports to worry about, giving him the freedom to experiment with ideas that would have been rejected immediately in any factory design review meeting, where risk-averse executives controlled the purse strings. The threat wasn't just to the factory team's race results, but to the entire business model of the motorcycle industry, which depended on consumers believing that factory motorcycles represented the pinnacle of available technology and performance. If independent builders could create superior motorcycles in small workshops using innovative materials and unconventional designs, consumers might start questioning why they were paying premium prices for factory bikes that suddenly looked dated and conservative by comparison. The racing organizations found themselves caught between their stated mission of promoting technical advancement and the economic reality that their events depended on factory support and sponsorship money that might disappear if those factories were consistently embarrassed by independent builders. The rulebooks that governed racing had been written with the assumption that only well-funded factory teams could afford to develop truly competitive motorcycles, and they reflected design philosophies that favored traditional construction methods and materials that factories had invested heavily in perfecting. Britten's use of carbon fiber, frameless construction, and unconventional suspension systems fell outside the parameters that the rulebooks had anticipated, creating ambiguities that racing officials could interpret either as allowable innovation or prohibited deviation from accepted standards. The decision about how to interpret those ambiguities would ultimately determine whether racing would evolve to embrace new technologies and materials or remain locked in traditional approaches that protected established manufacturers from disruptive competition that threatened their market positions and profit margins. The politics behind the scenes became increasingly complex as factory representatives began to pressure racing organizations to restrict or ban the Britten V1000 from competition. The arguments presented publicly focused on technical compliance and the need to maintain a level playing field by ensuring all competitors raced motorcycles that adhered to similar design philosophies and construction methods. The rulebooks were interpreted and reinterpreted to emphasize requirements that the Britten couldn't meet without abandoning the very innovations that made it successful, with particular attention paid to homologation rules that required motorcycles to be based on production models available to consumers. Since Britten had no intention of mass-producing the V1000 as a street-legal motorcycle, and couldn't possibly afford to do so even if he wanted to, this requirement effectively disqualified the motorcycle from many racing series, despite the fact that it had been competitive and successful whenever it was allowed to race. The private arguments among racing officials and factory representatives revealed the real motivations behind the effort to ban the Britten. Major manufacturers had invested enormous sums of money in their racing programs, viewing motorsports success as crucial to their marketing efforts and brand prestige. The sight of their expensive factory motorcycles being beaten by a garage-built prototype threatened to undermine the narrative that factory teams represented the pinnacle of motorcycle engineering and performance. If consumers began to question whether the premium prices charged for factory superbikes were really justified, or if talented independent builders could create superior motorcycles without the massive overhead and bureaucracy of large corporations, the implications for the entire motorcycle industry could be significant. The Britten V1000 had to be stopped, not because it was unsafe or unreliable or unfair in any meaningful sense, but because it was too successful at exposing the conservative nature of factory motorcycle design and the gap between what was possible and what the major manufacturers were actually delivering to racers and consumers. Between 1991 and 1998, John Britten and his team built only 10 Britten V1000 motorcycles, each one essentially a hand-built prototype that incorporated refinements and improvements based on lessons learned from racing and testing the previous examples. The limited production numbers reflected both the enormous amount of work required to build each motorcycle and the financial constraints that prevented Britten from expanding his operation into anything resembling commercial production. Each V1000 was slightly different from the others, as Britten continually experimented with variations in engine tuning, suspension geometry, aerodynamic details, and other aspects of the design in his ongoing quest to extract every possible advantage from his innovative concepts. The motorcycles that survive today are therefore not just rare collectibles, but unique examples of engineering evolution, each one representing a specific moment in the development of Britten's ideas and approaches to motorcycle design. The hand-built nature of each motorcycle meant that construction times stretched into months of painstaking work, with Britten and his small team fabricating carbon fiber components, assembling engines, and testing every system to ensure it met the exacting standards required for international racing competition. The financial investment required to build each V1000 was substantial, even by the standards of well-funded racing programs, and Britten funded much of the development by mortgaging his personal property and relying on support from a small group of dedicated sponsors who believed in his vision, despite the long odds against success. The workshop in Christchurch, where the motorcycles were built, was modest by any standard, lacking the climate-controlled facilities, precision machinery, and specialized tooling that factory race shops took for granted. Yet somehow Britten and his team produced motorcycles that outperformed machines built in facilities that cost millions of dollars to establish and maintain. Each new V1000 incorporated lessons learned from track testing and racing the previous examples, with Britten constantly refining the engine mapping, adjusting the suspension geometry, modifying the aerodynamic bodywork, and experimenting with different materials and construction techniques to improve performance and reliability. The evolutionary nature of the design meant that the later V1000 motorcycles were significantly more refined and powerful than the early examples, though even the first prototypes demonstrated performance that shocked professional racers who had spent their careers riding factory superbikes. The small production run also meant that Britten never achieved the economies of scale that would have made the motorcycles more affordable or the development process more sustainable, with each unit requiring custom fabrication work and hand finishing that prevented any hope of reducing costs through standardization or mass production techniques. The uniqueness of each motorcycle extended to details like paint schemes, component specifications, and even subtle differences in chassis geometry that reflected Britten's willingness to experiment with variations and see which approaches delivered the best results on the track. Some V1000 motorcycles were built specifically for particular racers or racing series, with customizations that optimized them for the tracks they would compete on and the riding styles of the professionals who would pilot them in competition. The rarity of the motorcycles has made them extraordinarily valuable in the collector market, with examples that come up for sale commanding prices that reflect both their historical significance and their status as some of the most innovative racing motorcycles ever created by an independent builder. The fact that only 10 were built means that most motorcycle enthusiasts will never have the opportunity to see a Britten V1000 in person, let alone witness one being ridden at speed, making the surviving examples precious artifacts of a brief moment when one man's vision challenged the entire established order of motorcycle racing and manufacturing. The racing career of the Britten V1000 was cut short not by mechanical failures or lack of competitiveness, but by the regulatory restrictions that increasingly excluded it from major racing series. Race organizers who had initially welcomed the Britten as an exciting addition to their events began to find reasons why it didn't quite fit within their rulebooks, or they created new categories with specifications that conveniently excluded the Britten's innovative features. The motorcycle that had proven it could beat factory superbikes in fair competition found itself unable to race at all in many series, relegated to exhibition appearances and demonstration runs that showcased its capabilities but prevented it from competing for championships and victories that would have further embarrassed the factory teams. The ban wasn't usually explicit or officially announced as a ban. Instead, it came through technical regulations that were ostensibly neutral but had the practical effect of excluding the Britten while allowing factory motorcycles to continue competing. The tragedy of the Britten V1000 story deepened in 1995 when John Britten passed away from cancer at the age of only 45, ending his contributions to motorcycle design and innovation just as he was reaching the peak of his creative powers. His death meant that the V1000 would never receive the continued development and refinement that could have addressed some of the regulatory concerns or led to new versions that fit within evolving rulebooks. The small team that had built the V1000 gradually dispersed without Britten's leadership and vision to hold them together, and the workshop in Christchurch that had produced one of the most advanced racing motorcycles in history eventually closed. The remaining Britten V1000 motorcycles were sold to collectors and museums around the world, where they continue to fascinate and inspire people who appreciate engineering innovation and the courage to challenge established conventions. The legacy of the Britten V1000 extends far beyond its limited racing career and the 10 examples that were built. The motorcycle proved that a small team with limited resources could challenge global manufacturers if they were willing to think differently and take risks that corporate bureaucracies would never approve. Britten's willingness to abandon conventional frame designs, experiment with exotic materials, and reimagine fundamental aspects of motorcycle architecture demonstrated that there was still enormous room for innovation in an industry that had become increasingly conservative and derivative. The fact that the racing establishment felt threatened enough to essentially ban the Britten rather than welcoming the competition it provided reveals uncomfortable truths about how motorsports sometimes prioritize commercial interests over genuine technical advancement and fair competition. Today, the surviving Britten V1000 motorcycles are displayed in museums and private collections around the world, celebrated as engineering masterpieces that represented a peak of innovation and independent creativity in motorcycle design. The Barber Vintage Motorsports Museum in Alabama houses one example, where American motorcycle enthusiasts can see firsthand the carbon fiber chassis, innovative front suspension, and compact V-twin engine that made the Britten so competitive. Other examples reside in New Zealand museums and private collections, carefully preserved as examples of what one man's vision and determination could achieve against overwhelming odds and institutional resistance. The motorcycles rarely run anymore, as their historical value and mechanical complexity make them too precious to risk in anything beyond occasional carefully controlled demonstrations. but their influence continues to inspire motorcycle designers and enthusiasts who believe that innovation and creativity should be encouraged rather than suppressed. The Te Papa Tongarewa Museum of New Zealand in Wellington displays a Britten V1000 as a national treasure, recognizing it as one of the most significant engineering achievements in the country's history and a testament to the innovative spirit that can flourish when talented individuals are given the freedom to pursue unconventional ideas. Private collectors who own Britten V1000 motorcycles treat them with reverence, typically reserved for priceless works of art, understanding that they possess not just rare motorcycles, but tangible evidence of what independent innovation can achieve when creativity and determination overcome institutional barriers and resource limitations. The carbon fiber components that were so revolutionary in the early 1990s have aged remarkably well, with proper storage and care ensuring that the structural integrity remains sound decades after the motorcycles were built. Though the exotic materials require specialized knowledge to maintain and preserve correctly, enthusiasts who visit museums housing Britten V1000 motorcycles often spend hours examining the details of the construction, marveling at the craftsmanship evident in the hand-laid carbon fiber bodywork, the precision of the machined engine components, and the innovative solutions Britten developed for problems that factory engineers solved with conventional approaches and unlimited budgets. The occasional demonstrations where Britten V1000 motorcycles are started and run briefly provide tantalizing glimpses of what they were like in their racing prime, with the distinctive sound of the V-twin engine and the compact, purposeful stance, reminding observers that these weren't just engineering exercises, but functional racing machines that competed successfully against the best that major manufacturers could field. Documentation of the Britten V1000's development and racing history has been carefully preserved by enthusiasts and historians who recognize the importance of maintaining detailed records of one of motorcycle racing's most remarkable underdog stories, ensuring that future generations can study and learn from Britten's approaches and innovations. The influence of the Britten V1000 can be seen in modern motorcycle designs that have adopted carbon fiber construction, frameless chassis concepts, and unconventional suspension systems that would have been considered too radical before Britten proved their viability on racetracks around the world. Motorcycle engineering students and professional designers continue to study the Britten V1000 as a case study in innovative thinking and the practical application of advanced materials and unconventional design approaches that challenge established assumptions about how motorcycles should be built. The story of the Britten V1000 has been featured in documentaries, books, and magazine articles that explore both the technical achievements and the human drama of one man's quest to build a motorcycle that could compete with factory superbikes, despite having none of the resources or institutional support that major manufacturers commanded. Some collectors and enthusiasts have built replica Britten V1000 motorcycles, or created tribute bikes that incorporate elements of Britten's design philosophy, though none can truly capture the innovation and historical significance of the original 10 motorcycles that John Britten and his team created in that small Christchurch workshop during the 1990s. The story of why the Britten V1000 was banned highlights the tension between innovation and regulation that exists in all forms of motorsports. On one hand, racing is supposed to push the boundaries of technology and performance, rewarding creativity and engineering excellence with victories and championships that validate new approaches and ideas. On the other hand, racing organizations must maintain some level of standardization and control to ensure fair competition and prevent runaway development costs that would make participation impossible for anyone except the wealthiest manufacturers. The challenge lies in finding the balance between these competing goals, and the Britten V1000 represents a case where the balance tipped too far toward protecting established interests rather than rewarding genuine innovation. The ban of the Britten V1000 serves as a cautionary tale about what can happen when industry politics and commercial concerns override the fundamental purpose of racing as a proving ground for new technology and ideas. John Britten's motorcycle demonstrated conclusively that the conventional wisdom governing racing motorcycle design in the early 1990s was not actually the pinnacle of what was possible. but rather a comfortable compromise that major manufacturers had settled into because it was easier than taking real risks. The fact that a self-taught engineer working in a small workshop could build a motorcycle that embarrassed factory teams with budgets hundreds of times larger should have been celebrated as proof that motorsports still rewarded creativity and skill over money and resources. Instead, the racing establishment chose to eliminate the threat through regulatory restrictions that made it impossible for the Britten to compete, protecting the established order at the cost of suppressing one of the most innovative motorcycles ever created. The Britten V1000 remains a symbol of what independent innovation can achieve when talent, determination, and creativity combine in pursuit of a vision that challenges conventional thinking. John Britten didn't have the resources or institutional support that factory race teams took for granted, but he had something more valuable: the freedom to experiment without corporate committees second-guessing every decision, the courage to abandon conventional designs that weren't working as well as they should, and the engineering skill to translate his ideas into a motorcycle that worked brilliantly in the real world of racing competition. The motorcycle he created proved that the major manufacturers had become complacent, relying on their brand prestige and marketing budgets, rather than genuine technical superiority to maintain their dominance. The ban that prevented the Britten from continuing to expose that complacency protected the established order, but it couldn't erase the lesson that the V1000 had already taught anyone paying attention. For motorcycle enthusiasts and engineering fans who appreciate innovation and creativity, the Britten V1000 represents both an inspiration and a tragedy. It's inspiring because it proves that one person with a good idea and the determination to see it through can create something that challenges the biggest players in an industry and forces everyone to reconsider their assumptions about what's possible. It's tragic because the racing establishment's decision to ban the motorcycle meant that we never got to see how far Britten could have taken his ideas with more time and development, or how the major manufacturers might have responded if they had been forced to truly compete against his innovations, rather than simply lobbying to have them excluded from racing. The 10 Britten V1000 motorcycles that were built represent only the beginning of what could have been a revolution in motorcycle design, cut short by regulatory politics and John Britten's untimely death before his ideas could fully mature and influence the broader industry. Have you ever seen a Britten V1000 in person at a museum or collection? And did it change your perspective on what independent builders and innovators can achieve when they're willing to think differently? What other banned or restricted racing machines do you think deserved better treatment from the sanctioning bodies that controlled their fate? The story of the Britten V1000 reminds us that progress in any field requires people willing to challenge established conventions and take risks that comfortable institutions prefer to avoid, and that sometimes the most important innovations are the ones that make established players nervous enough to try to suppress them. If you found this story of innovation, competition, and the politics that can stifle both compelling, subscribe for more forgotten motorcycle legends that shaped our mechanical world and challenged the established order in ways that still resonate today.